Thank you very much for being here. My story with regard to the disclosure process is very simple. I grew up in Roswell, New Mexico, the site of the first UFO crash, the alleged UFO crash. And my story is as a result of growing up there. I was a senior in high school, just going into my senior year in 1947, when on one day the Roswell Record announced that an alien craft had crashed, and the next day changed that story and said no, the Air Force said that was a weather balloon. And since I was on my way to college and more interested in those things, I didn't pay much attention to it at that point in time. However, my family was in the agribusiness. My grandfather was a cattle buyer and sold registered hereford bulls to the ranchers in the area, knew everybody in the area, in the Pecos Valley and beyond, sold cattle into Arizona, western Texas, and was affectionately known as Bull Mitchell in those parts. And so it was not unsurprising to me later on that the lore of the area, of our friends and the people in Roswell, including the sheriff's department, and a military friend of ours, a major, who was also turned out to be a friend of Jesse Marcel, who was the first Air Force officer on the site of the crash. And this Air Force officer was in administration. He was not really involved, but he eventually told me his story, and that's how I became involved. So after my Apollo flight, I did very little. I knew nothing but the lore of the region up until that point. But after my Apollo flight, when I was back in the area and visiting relatives and friends, some of the people in the area who had been involved, what I call the old-timers, who were involved in the 1940s, 1947, and subsequent with the Roswell crash, and people like in the sheriff's department who had been to the crash site and were supervising traffic. My friend and friend of our family, the major, who was an office mate of in the administrative function at Walker Air Force Base. These folks, because they had been shushed and told not to talk about their experience by military authority in those days, and on dire consequence if they did, felt that here in the 70s, many years later, that they didn't want to go to the grave with their story. They wanted to tell somebody reliable. And being a local boy and having been to the moon, they considered me reliable enough to whisper in my ear their particular story and their association with the Roswell crash, including the family of the undertaker who provided coffins for the alleged alien victims, and others on site who had been involved or knew the story. And of course, eventually I ran into Jesse Marcel Jr., the son of the Jesse Marcel, who was the first military officer on the site, and knew his story, and knew his story well, and we became friends in later years in this disclosure movement. And at some point, about 10 years ago, and I can't remember what date it was right now, when the disclosure movement was going strongly, I came here to Washington with a Navy commander by the name of Will Miller and Dr. Stephen Greer, and we were able to get an appointment at the Pentagon to talk about what we knew, or what we allegedly knew, what we thought we knew, and went and told our story. And the powers that be at the Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff listened to our story and said, the Admiral said, well, I don't know that story. I don't know that that's true, but I will find out. So we departed, went on our way, and subsequently learned through Dr. Greer and through Will Miller, and that those stories had been confirmed, and that the Admiral had been denied access when he tried to get into the inner workings of that process. And we had confirmation of that, although that Admiral now denies the fact that this is the fact. So my story is essentially that. I do have no first-hand experience with the ET effort, except the fact that I know all of these research people that you'll hear from today, and some who are not here today, who have spent a long amount of their lives and time doing research into the alien visitation, UFO crashes, and so forth. And I urge that those who are doubtful read the books, read the lore, and start to understand what has really been going on, because there is no doubt we are being visited. And as a person who is a part of the first generation of being a spacefarer of our civilization and having gone to the moon, and realizing that I do, and many of us do now, that have seen the Hubble pictures from space, the universe that we live in is much more wondrous, exciting, complex, and far-reaching than we were ever able to know up to this point in time. And the fact we have wondered, were we alone in the universe forever? Only in our period do we really have evidence, no, we're not alone. We are just one planet with intelligent life on it, and probably it is time, now that we are spacefarers on our planet, that we get active, because we're really universal beings. And in the long stretch of things, if we think about it in the longest possible range, we realize, and I realize this from my studies in astronomy and astrophysics, our sun will burn out in due course, and we have to be off this planet if our species is to survive. So anybody, any species, any planet that is on around the mainstream star like ours is, only has a finite amount of time on that star before it burns out. And so our destiny, in my opinion, and we might as well get started with it, is become a part of the planetary community of nations, of planets, just like when we were much newer on this planet, and we found tribes over in the next valley or across the next mountains, and we started forming communities then and reaching out beyond ourselves. At this point in human history on this planet, we're now starting, and ready should be, to reach out beyond our planet and beyond our solar system to find out what is really going on out there. And the 20th and 21st century that we now live in, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution really didn't take off until the 19th century. And I tell the story to some of my younger audiences, particularly in schools, that my great-grandparents went across from South Georgia to West Texas in a covered wagon at the end of the Civil War in the 1870s. My family, my father's generation, was involved with going off the planet in aircraft. And less than 100 years later, I went to the moon. So some covered wagons to going to the moon in less than 100 years is a history of the development of our civilization in not our lifetime, but a couple of generations. And so it's time to start thinking in those terms. And particularly since now, in the 20th and 21st century, we suddenly find that due to our expertise and our genius in science and technology, we have exploded our population from under 2 billion at the beginning of the 20th century to over 6.5 billion at this point. And our consumption patterns are clearly indicating that we are utilizing our non-renewable resources at an unacceptable rate, a non-sustainable rate. So we've got a lot of thinking to do about what being an advanced civilization really means. But let's put all that aside for a moment because we're here to talk about disclosure. And what I am suggesting is it is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence. And I call upon our government to open up like other governments have, and you will hear about that this morning. Like the Belgians have, the French have, the Brazilians have, the Argentines, the Mexicans have all released their files. It's about time now that we do the same thing and become a part of this planetary community that is now trying to take our proper role as spacefaring civilization. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, now, would any of the media like to ask either of these gentlemen a question at this point? Any of the reporters?
Yeah.
Alan?
Can you tell us, Dr. Mitchell, exactly what the locals of Roswell told you, if you could remember specifics?
On the mic.
Yeah.
Yes, it was that the Roswell event was an alien craft, that it was not of this planet. That's the essence. What they really told me was their particular, each one had some particular part of it, like a sheriff's deputy was controlling traffic but heard from what the other people what was going on. The family of the undertaker told about the small coffins that were created for the alien bodies. And my Air Force family friend said yes, he had heard the same thing from Major Brazel. Each one of them just told what their portion of the activity was all about. So putting it all together, the sum total was, yes, it was an alien spacecraft.
Thank you.
Okay. And the question?
Just had another question about
Sure.
fellow astronauts talking to you about seeing space, UFOs in space.
No, I have talked to all of the astronauts up through the Apollo program. And the only ones that have had UFO experience were in their Air Force careers where were vectored to chase a UFO, never quite made it, couldn't quite get them in their sights or whatever. And that was Deke Slayton, and Gordon Cooper had his experience that's been well recited about seeing one land at Edwards Air Force Base, seeing the pictures of it. Suddenly the pictures disappeared into the vaults of Washington and never returned. But the military people that had UFO experience were in their Air Force careers before the astronaut program. And of course, being a military and Navy pilot myself, the stories among airline pilots and other pilots is they're just all over the places. And we're all told, shut up about it. I never chased one myself, but all my friends that did, where it was all the same thing. Don't talk about it.
Thank you.
You know, on April the 20th last year, a little over a year ago, you spoke, of course, at the X Conference 2009, and then you appeared at the National Press Club. And as part of the press conference, which was covered by CNN and the Washington Post and the Washington Times, etc., and broadcast by CNN worldwide, you called on the Obama administration to end a truth embargo, to disclose, to release all the UFO files. It's the first person that I'm aware of that has done that of your stature. There were some people that did that back in 2001, and it's happened. You had a lot of news coverage for a couple of weeks. In the year since, have you gotten much follow-up? Has there been a lot of negative, positive? How do you reflect back on what's happened since?
Well, for the last year or so, it's been pretty heavy. I've gotten many inquiries from around the world, done many interviews from around the world, and I see the momentum picking up. Now, I understand that it's not just our administration here that makes this decision, but I think the movement, the momentum is moving toward disclosure the world over, and certainly people the world over are becoming more open to it.
Would you say that overall, overall you've had a relatively much more positive than negative response to your call on this issue?
Well, I'm not sure it's just my efforts, but I think the whole movement has been gaining momentum over the last couple of years or so.
Okay, very good. I think George has a question for you.
You know, when I first got to know Edgar Mitchell, he had written the book, The Way of the Explorer, which I found to be a fascinating book about his work in the realm that we are all interested in. Edgar, I've always wanted to ask you, what drives you to try to get the answers to what we're all looking for as well? You have not stopped in all the years I've known you. Why do you keep at it?
Well, it's the ultimate question, George. I think humans have been asking this question in one form or another for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. Who are we? How do we get here? Where are we going? And what's this all about? And it's that ultimate curiosity that drives me continuously. I want to know some answers that we really don't have. And we think we're pretty smart in the 21st century, in the 20th century. But in my opinion, we're still just barely out of the trees.
Okay, Cheryl's got a question for you.
Oh, right, Dr. Mitchell. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
There she is.
Hello.
Hello.
It was fun last year sitting with you at the table, though, right, with George Norrie and you. And we like to have you here in person, but this year this is second best, isn't it?
Just
out of curiosity, could you bring us up to date on how Quantrek is doing? And I am.
Well, Quantrek has great hopes. We have a lot of people interested. We still are short on funding. We need more funding, and we're going out after that very actively at this point. And hopefully, we've got some promises. We've got some interested investors, and we'll see what the next few months brings.
Edgar, for the audience, could you quickly describe Quantrek's mission?
I'm sorry, say that
Could
again.
you quickly describe Quantrek's mission?
Okay, Quantrek is a sister organization to my Noetics Foundation, but more focused on the hard sciences of physics and biology. And we now understand, just in the recent years, that the quantum world is at the basis of our perceptual mechanism. I often tell little simple stories to help get the idea across. In the English language, we call intuition our sixth sense. If we really ought to call it our first sense, or some would even say our zero sense, because it was around before we or our solar system were around. It's more fundamental than all of our sensory mechanisms. And we're now starting to understand there's a quantum biology that's very important, and that the quantum world is really at the basis of everything. Even though it operates at the subatomic level, it has ramifications and effects at all levels of nature. And that's something that's just become apparent here in the last couple of decades.
Dr. Mitchell, have you touched base with Dan Brown since his new book used ions so prominently?
I have not personally been in touch with Dan Brown, but I understand some of the people out at Noetics have. And I understand that Tom Hanks and crew out in Hollywood are trying to make a movie about all this. And so we're starting to, from a promotional point of view, we're starting to reach the world in a different way.
You know, it's kind of interesting, Edgar. As you know, you spoke at the press club. Had the Brown book come out last April when you were here a year ago? Had it already come out?
After that, it didn't really come out until the fall.
It came out the fall before or afterwards?
No, after. I can't remember. I'm sure.
Okay, but I think what happened is you got Edgar comes to the Washington, he comes to the press club, and he calls for disclosure, right? Which is highly exopolitical. Then Brown's book, The Lost Symbol, comes out. It's about Washington. It's about secrets. It's about the intricate arrangements and what have you. And he chooses to make ions a highly featured part of the book in a very positive way. It's all upscale. And because he did that, he never even asked permission. He didn't check with Edgar. He didn't check with ions. He just did it, knowing that when it came out, they'd be going, "Yay, that's fantastic." So you see the kind of the circle being closed here in a way. It's all kind of coming around. Edgar, I've got a question for you. And this gets down to the nuts and bolts, the real stuff that is going to affect the lives of just hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. It's a real simple question. Is it the massive oil slick that's now spreading in the Gulf of Mexico, a huge advertisement for why we need to know what has been done with any ET-derived technology, particularly the new energy physics? Oh, we lost him again. Edgar, we've lost you again. The sound went off. Hang on, Edgar. Let me tell you something. If you knew what had happened in the last 3 days, you guys would be picketing the CIA big time. You'd be down there with the signs, because somebody is running an op here, all right? Because the weirdness is gone over the top. And so I am so proud. I feel good. I'm very proud. All right. How are we doing, Doc? You got him back? Have we got you back, Edgar? Not yet? Okay, hang on. How could we have him and then lose him? Oh, no, I know. He just went around the backside of the moon. He is out of touch. Right? And you back? Almost. Still no?
I'm sorry.
He's back. You're back. Edgar's back. Okay. About the Gulf of oil slick, huge advertisement. We've got to get at that ET physics. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that just a little bit, Dr. Mitchell? Could you be a little more specific?
Oh, let me ask you something. Let me rephrase this, because I know you said something in a talk out near well, I think it was at Ions. It was Ions a number of years ago. You are convinced that we have extraterrestrial derived technology in our laboratories and have been working on it for many years. Isn't that the case?
Well, I can conjecture or postulate that. I do not know that for an absolute fact.
Yes.
But I suspect the more I have studied, the more I've become familiar with ET and ET technology. They've been around for a long time, and we've been studying it for a long time. And the more we study it, the deeper, further back it goes.
All right, another question from the ever more fit George Norrie.
Kidding, Edgar. Kidding.
That's stuttering me.
Edgar, every time I tell people I know you and that you walked on the moon and you were part of Apollo 14, they all say, he saw things on the moon. He's just not telling us. And I have said, if Edgar Mitchell had seen things unusual on the moon, he would tell us.
You're absolutely correct.
But you believe that there has been an ET presence. How come?
Well, I believe there's been an ET presence because I grew up in the Roswell area, and that was part of the Polar. And I eventually went back to Washington and I confirmed. Now, that's a long story short, but I know virtually all of the major investigators. I've been studying myself, although this isn't my primary interest, hasn't been for years. I'm pretty knowledgeable, and I do know most of the work that has been developed over the last many years, and I've been studying the work that goes back for centuries. And there seems to be a history here that we just know nothing about with our modern knowledge.
When we were here last year, Edgar, you grabbed my arm at the dinner table and said, I want to be the oldest astronaut to go back into space. There are 3 more shuttle flights left. You going to make it?
Well, I'm not planning on those, using those, none of those. The story you're referring to, George, is happened after John Glenn went back the first time at 77, and people started asking me, do I want to go back into space or go back to the moon or do whatever? And I said, of course, but I'm going to wait, in my smart-ass remark, because I'm going to wait till I'm 100 and beat John's record. Once you get that out into the culture, it keeps coming back to haunt me, so I guess I'm going to have to do it, you see.
Go ahead. Oh yeah, 100. Okay, 100. 100's good. 100's good. But you know, Edgar, I'm looking at you and I'm seeing that kind of smile on your face. You're going back into space on anti-gravitic drive, aren't you?
I'm going back on.
You're going to go back into space on anti-gravitic drive, right? None of this chemical rocket stuff anymore.
something like that.
The oldest man to go into warp. It could happen. All right, Edgar, another quick question. And this we'll wrap up here. As you've spoken out on this issue for 10 years, most notably the instance on Kerrang! Radio in July of 2008, massive international coverage on that, raised a lot of buzz. And then
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay. As you have talked about this issue for the last 10 years,
Yeah.
most notably the Kerrang! Radio interview, which generated all this buzz in Europe, right?
That one kind of broke it loose internationally with the Kerrang! Radio show. After that one, I was getting calls from all over the world almost the next week.
It's kind of interesting when you talk about something for 8 years, and then suddenly you just say it in a certain venue, and it's like you just said it for the first time. Oh my God, he thinks there's ETs, and you're wondering where you been for 8 years.
Absolutely, that seems to be the way things happen.
And of course, I knew about that radio show, and of course, that's one of the reasons why I started to move very, very quickly to see if I could get you more deeply involved. And of course, at the press conference, where we got the second round of very significant coverage. And we would have had more. Your son was ill, you had to leave, otherwise you'd have been on Larry King that very night. My question is this: as you've done all this talking, do you feel the presence of Gordon Cooper just over your shoulder, who tried to bring this issue out repeatedly in the late 70s and in the 80s, and he went to the UN and so forth?
Gordon was very open about the ET presence and his experiences. Several of the astronauts, including Gordon, had experiences before their astronaut experience, and they talked about that. But he continued to talk about it, even very openly for many years, until he passed on.
One last question, and we'll let you go. This is a little bit, well, no, this is appropriate. It's a wonky question, W-O-N-K, from Washington at the Press Club. Your thoughts about President Obama's vision policy that he went down to Florida to talk about? What is your fundamental thinking about where he wants to go now with the space program? Or where he doesn't want to go?
Well, are you asking my comment? Is that what you're asking?
What are your thoughts on the administration's policy as announced by President Obama in Florida down at the Space Center, I think a few months ago?
Well, I certainly don't disagree with what he was saying. I do think we need to go back to the moon and do for no reason, better reason, to get our experience base up again, to protect technologies, because it's a lot closer to go to Mars. We'll eventually go on to Mars, I believe, and I think I applaud the president trying to get the entrepreneurial and the business community, industrial community more involved in taking the lead. He's got an awfully tough job on his hand correcting the excesses of the collapse of the global economic system and our own economic system that he's had to deal with. So I don't fault him for some of the decisions he's made, but he is suggesting we need to move forward and we need to get the
I was just a systems engineer on a well-functioning spacecraft coming home. And so, sure, I had work to do, but not nearly as pressing as before. And we were oriented such that we were rotating to keep thermal balance on the spacecraft, and oriented in such a way that every 2 minutes, the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, and a 360-degree panorama of the heavens appeared in the cabin window. And that was awesome. It was an overwhelming experience. And we have to realize that in space, without the intervening atmosphere, the heavens are 10 times as bright, stars 10 times as numerous, because there's no atmosphere to block the light. And this experience was overwhelming, in that suddenly I realized, from my studies in astronomy, that the molecules of my body and the molecules in the body of the spacecraft and my partners were prototyped or manufactured in an ancient generation of stars. And instead of intellectual knowledge, it was a visceral experience, a visceral knowing, accompanied by an ecstasy. And I'd never had such an experience, and I didn't really know what it was. And this experience continued for 3 days coming home whenever I got a chance to look at the heavens. And after I came back, I was so profoundly, well, not concerned, I was amazed by this experience that I started looking in the science literature and found nothing to explain it, and in the religious literature and found nothing. And I appealed to professors over at a nearby university, at Rice University, to see if they could help me find in the literature anything that would help describe this experience. And they came back a couple of weeks later with the idea that they found in the Sanskrit called samadhi, or salvakapa samadhi. In particular, that means you see things in their separateness, but experience them viscerally and emotionally as a unity, a oneness, and accompanied with an ecstasy. And I said, yes, that's the type of experience. And then I went on to research over a period of time other traditions and different cultures. And of course, you find in the Greek the metanoia experience, and you find in the Zen satori, and in other traditions they call it different things, but it's the same type of transcendent experience of where you're catapulted out of one state of being into this state of ecstasy and bliss, where you realize everything is totally interconnected. And that was the essence of that experience. Since we were the first generation of spacefarers from Earth, that the questions human had been asking for all time about who am I, where did I come from, what's my relationship to the cosmos, that now that we were the first generation of spacefarers, maybe we really needed to be asking that question all over again. And my answer to that was to form the Institute of Noetic Sciences and to use the tools of science to understand consciousness, because consciousness had not been a proper subject in science for 400 years. And I thought now that we had quantum science perhaps and spacefaring, that perhaps we ought to readdress that subject. And that was the, that was the basis of starting Noetics. The conclusions concerning consciousness are still incomplete, but it's clearly rooted in the quantum nature of things. And for the last 80 years of the 20th century, the physicists have insisted that quantum mechanics only pertained to subatomic matter, and they continue to adhere to the Cartesian dualism that said body, mind, physicality, spirituality are different realms of reality that don't interact. And it turned out to be dead wrong. That's just not the case. That the quantum entanglement phenomena causes effects at all scale sizes of nature, not just a subatomic realm. Well, the greatest challenge for now in this beginning of the 21st century is to move toward conditions that will allow civilization to sustain itself, because we're rapidly using up all the non-renewable resources. Our population's consumption is beyond anything that the planet can sustain for a long period, and we have to learn to rethink this and to change our lifestyles in order to appropriately continue to exist on this planet. And furthermore, we must learn to curb our tendencies for war, because we've invented such awesome weaponry that if we really use it against each other, in due course, we will end all life on Earth with atomic weaponry. And if we want to exist, we can't afford to do that. Well, we don't know nearly all we would like to know, but certainly life in the universe seems to be ubiquitous. The notion that we are alone in the universe is clearly absurd, particularly when we, with the modern Hubble telescope pictures, we start to see the vastness of the universe and the vast galaxies and galactic clusters filling all of space that we can observe far beyond anything we've imagined before having those pictures. And so it puts a new impetus on the smallness of our little galaxy and our little solar system as just a tiny little speck of sand in the greatness of all that's around us. But the likelihood that we're the only living substance in all of this is absolutely absurd. Well, my opinion is based upon primarily not my personal experience, because I don't have any personal first-hand UFO experience. Only the fact that I grew up in Roswell, New Mexico, which was the site of presumed alien crash in 1947, and which, from what I call the testimony of the old-timers who were there and who had been hushed up by government authority, military authority, almost on pain of death at the time, and who had harbored their knowledge quietly for years, as when I came back from the moon and I was a local boy, they considered me safe enough to tell their story to, that they were a part of the recovery effort and the observer of the so-called Roswell crash, and that they knew for sure that it was an alien craft. And subsequent sightings, subsequent evidence has reaffirmed all of that we are being visited and have been visited by alien spacecraft and alien beings. And our governments around the world have covered it up, but only recently other governments have started to open their files, except the United States has still not started opening its files. But most of the major countries in Europe, South America, that have these files, and in Mexico, well, Belgium, France, Brazil, and Argentina, and Mexico have opened their files, and the United States has not. And that's what much of our effort now is all about, is to get these files of the United States opened up for public inspection. There was utterly no discussion of NASA, in NASA while I was there, or in my presence, about UFOs, the phenomenon, or any events that seems to be prevalent in other parts of the government, that I know of none with NASA itself.
Because there have been rumors that some of the former astronauts have kind of come forth with information that they have seen or that they know of sightings.
Well, there are some astronauts that had experiences, and those I have talked to up to the Apollo program, those experiences that they had were pre-NASA. They were during their Air Force careers, while they were either being vectored to chase UFOs, or in the case of Gordon Cooper, while he was at Edwards Air Force Base, observed one landing in the premises. And so those stories they have told. But I know of no stories up to the Apollo program of astronauts having encounters in space of any sort.
Because this is, of course, the big question. I mean, when some of our researchers, our ufologists now say that there is something going on all the time around us, and there's thousands of sightings, and NASA seems to, well, know nothing about it, or
well, no, officially NASA knows nothing about it, because that's not their mission. And I suspect that during the shuttle program, not the Apollo program, but we were talking about going to the moon. But I do understand that from some of the shuttle astronauts, there has been some incidents. I am not versed in those incidents, but I have talked with virtually all of the Apollo astronauts, and in space we have nothing to report. Well, it's my hope that we open this whole issue up, and as I have said frequently, we're at a point in history where we have to become a part of the neighborhood of inhabited planets, rather like a neighborhood of a community, which we have not even acknowledged that that community exists up until this point.
But what will it take for the national governments, and especially the American government, to come to a point of disclosure?
It will take a real emphasis and effort on the part of the citizenry to accept these phenomena and start to move out in a new way. And we talk about that as paradigm shift, a change in thinking, and that has to take place here.
But you have been one of the four front runners now in this campaign, so to say, over the last years. And how have you been met among both the public and the media, and also your colleagues?
Well, the public and the people I've talked to have been receptive. As we both know, the media has not been receptive up until now. But in the last year or so, it seems to have markedly changed. Whether that was a one-time event remains to be seen. But the media interest has changed in 2008 and now into 2009 quite differently than it was before that. Well, for some of us who have been studying the phenomenon, we consider quantum fluctuations in the zero-point energy field, which is all space, as the source, the ground of being, the source of all existence, and that matter has arisen from that. And if there was a Big Bang, it had to come out of the zero-point field. The question of how did the Big Bang arise is a valid question. But most of us now are thinking, that have studied the phenomenon, that we're really dealing with constant creation of matter from the zero-point field, as opposed to a Big Bang. Now that may take another decade or two to validate, or it may be invalidated. But at the moment, the Big Bang seems to me to be very suspect as a source of all being.
So what science now defines as dark energy or dark matter, it might be something...
Some of us postulate that it could very well be proto-matter coming into being. And it's too early to... We haven't proved that or validated that with science yet. But it's my thought that that is where this is going, that maybe we will be able to do that in the next decade or so.